Welcome to question period in the Alberta Legislature. My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House and MLA for Calgary-Egmont. After question period today, the House will be discussing the estimates of the Department of Transportation and Utilities, and if there is time, also the estimates of the Department of the Solicitor General. This is the 25th day that the House has been working on the budget estimates, and by standing orders of the Assembly, this is indeed the last day that the main budget estimates can be discussed. Next week, the House should be moving on to discussing some of the new bills that have been introduced, such as the School Act, which was introduced yesterday.
Let us pray. We give thanks to God for the rich heritage of this province as found in our people. We pray that native-born Albertans and those who have come from other places may continue to work together to preserve and enlarge the precious heritage called Alberta. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to request leave to introduce Bill 25, the Municipal Taxation Act 1988. This bill, when passed, will significantly alter Alberta's rural assessment system and provide for the more equitable treatment of rural taxpayers. These changes were developed with the Alberta Association of Municipal Districts and Counties, and additional sections will allow for the more efficient operation of our municipal tax system.
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs has moved first reading of Bill 25, Municipal Taxation Amendment Act 1988. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 25, Municipal Taxation Amendment Act 1988, introduced by the Honourable Mr. Anderson, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs.
I have the honour today to present the annual report for the fiscal year ended 31 March 1987 of the Alberta Securities Commission.
Just a minute. Yep.
To file 3 copies of AIDS, a Perspective for Canadians, summary report and recommendations recently published by the Royal Society of Canada.
Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs.
I also have the honour today to file the 36th annual report covering the year 1987 pursuant to the Public Contributions Act.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Bow Valley.
Speaker, it is my pleasure today to introduce to you and to the Assembly 11 grade 7, 8, and 9 students from Bindloss School. They're seated in the members gallery, and they're accompanied by their teachers, Mr. Jeff Pugh and Miss Karen Bongards. They're also accompanied by parents Gail Andrews and Reg King. I would ask that they now stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Member for Innisfail, followed by Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 46 grade 7 and 8 students from the Bowden School. They are accompanied by their teachers, Mr. Wagner and Mr. Reeve, and parents, Mr. Dick, Mrs. Koch, and Mrs. Adams. They are seated in the members gallery, and I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased today to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly three gentlemen who have worked very hard at helping to develop Bill 25 introduced earlier this morning. They're people dedicated to serving Albertans and who have done an excellent job in that respect. And I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Joe Smith, President of the Alberta Association of Municipal Districts and Counties, Mr. Jack Edworthy, the Executive Director of the same association, and Mr. Steve Cherwanek, a member of the Parkland Rural Residents Association. They're in the members' gallery, and I'd ask them to stand and receive the welcome and thanks of the Assembly.
Minister of Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce in the members' gallery Mr. and Mrs. Jim MacLeod of Edson. They were here to see the introduction of Bill 25, which includes what I like to call the MacLeod Amendment. I'd ask them to rise and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Edmonton Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 58 grade 6 students from Grace Martin Elementary School, a school in the constituency of Edmonton Avonmore. They are accompanied by their teachers Elaine Flayman, Kathy Jameson, Lynn Kruger, Donna LaRose, and they are seated in the public gallery. I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, I note, and frankly we're glad that the Minister of Education has backed down from the more controversial elements generated by the Draft Act from last year. Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering now when the government will address a major challenge facing basic education, that of funding. Mr. Speaker, over the past decade, provincial support for basic education has declined from more than 70% to about 55%. My question to the Premier, will the Premier advise when the government intends to reverse the trend and restore provincial funding for education from general resource revenues? The Premier said it's #1 priority.
Yeah, prove it.
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Minister of Education dealt with this very question yesterday from another member of the opposition, which time she explained that government's funding for education has increased.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's just not the case. It's gone from 70% from the provincial level to 55%. We're not talking about overall what the municipalities are paying. And the point is, Mr. Speaker, there may have been an increase in dollars, but it hasn't kept up to inflation. My point to the Minister, or to the Premier, and I want to make this clear, is what action has the Premier taken? He said it was the highest priority to restore the shrinking priority of education coming from the province, not the municipalities.
Again, Mr. Speaker, just to make it clear for the honourable member, since he seems to miss the point, the government's financing has increased for education. It is our priority. The education of our young people, extremely important, and we're going to continue to make it our priority. That's why in this government we provide more funds for education than any province in Canada. I should also point out, Mr. Speaker, to the honourable member, that whether it's municipal or provincial, it's taxpayers who are providing the funds. There's no big secret that who the funds come from.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier is just wrong. He hasn't checked his facts. Not only has the provincial share of education declined, but Alberta spends the least overall percentage of gross domestic product in Canada, and we're now third in per pupil capita. How does the Premier justify those figures in view of the fact of the statement he made just in the last minute?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, there is 2 departments of education in this government, and when you put the dollars together, Mr. Speaker, there's no question we support education. It's unfortunate the Minister of Advanced Education isn't here as well as the Minister of Education. I'm sure they both want to make sure that the leader of the NDP did have the facts rather than be so misinformed by whatever researchers they employ. There's no question, Mr. Speaker, that the government has been increasing its funding for education. The funding for students' assistance increased dramatically. Equity funding has increased dramatically. Funding for handicapped education has increased dramatically. This government's commitment for education is the first in Canada.
Mr. Speaker, that's totally misleading the House. To bring in advanced education is nonsense. We're talking about basic education. My question to the Premier, obviously he's self-satisfied and smug about the level of education funding by those answers. So I want to ask him, what advice then would he give local boards that are struggling, if he knows anything about this province? Should they cut services? Should they increase property taxes, or should they use more user fees, or all of the above? What should they do?
Mr. Speaker, we should remove from the honourable leaders of the NDP's mind that somehow there's a magic source of funds. The funds flow from the taxpayers. And to try and make the position that, oh, you'll take it from the provincial government, that isn't the taxpayers, that's foolish. And also, Mr. Speaker, all you have to do is talk to the boards throughout Alberta, as I have, and you will get from them their belief that the funds they receive here, they know are the highest level of funds in Canada, and they are pleased with funding in this province. They know that there's a balance that the taxpayer can afford. They know that taxpayers now are borrowing in Europe and the United States and other places to fund education, but they also know that they are getting their fair share.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, who once again exhibits a rather tenuous hold on reality, could he help the taxpayers in helping their long-term plans, particularly of municipal government, by outlining what is his target in the future? We've moved down from 85% funding to 55%. Would he be able to, in order to help the taxpayers and their local government, give a target that he's moving towards in the next couple of years as to the percentage that the provincial government would fund?
Mr. Speaker, we will make the same commitment we make to taxpayers in our budget, that you'll have the lowest taxes in Canada and you'll have the best dollars for education in Canada. That's the target we have. That's the one we're living up to. Exactly. Too bad the honourable member doesn't like it.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Vegreville.
Go get him, Barry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Agriculture, in his feeble attempts to justify this government's bias against a grain-based ethanol industry, as illustrated by these two reports, the Minister of Agriculture admitted yesterday that there is a minor error. Well, Mr. Speaker, that minor error resulted in underestimating the net economic benefit to Alberta by over 400%. And I'd like to ask the Minister if he's aware that in addition to this major error, there are several statements made in both reports that are false and misleading, and that rural Albertans consider these reports to be as useful as Eaton's catalogues were in the old days.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member can make light of a very important industry, the agricultural community. We take it very seriously, unlike the members within the New Democratic Party. Mr. Speaker, I indicated yesterday that it was minor as it related to the net flow through to the agricultural community. And Mr. Speaker, that is minor. Contrary to what the honourable member has said, the net benefit will still be in a negative position, notwithstanding the error, and I admit and regret the error as it relates to that report. The purpose of releasing that report was to allow others to have the opportunity for input. We're glad that we received that input because they did uncover that error. But still, notwithstanding that fact, and contrary to the statements of the honourable member, the net direct benefit to the agricultural community is still less than the incentives that would have to be offered. And if you will allow me, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to get into the figures whereby incentives would have to be offered to the extent of some $22.5 million in the event that we were to go to a 3% ethanol, 5% methanol blend. If we went to a 10% ethanol blend, the incentive would have to be $33.1 million, and the net direct benefit would be in the vicinity of $11.5 million. Now, I recognize the honourable member might have shares in the ethanol industry or ethanol energies, but I'm speaking for the farmers, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to speak for the farmers.
He got his answer certified, eh?
It's pretty hard for anyone to have shares in an ethanol industry with this government in position, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
But the minister said yesterday also that nothing would make him happier than to see an ethanol industry profitable in Alberta. And I'd like to ask him, if this is so, then why did the minister accept 2 reports and base conclusions on these reports when they don't even consider the broad regional economic benefits, the environment benefits, the agricultural diversification benefits, not even considered in these reports?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member's wrong again, as he was yesterday, and I just pointed out his error as it related to the net benefits of the agricultural community. Yesterday, he also indicated it would insulate our grain farmers from the world commodities. He's wrong on that. Those are set on the international market. He indicated that ethanol energies had made application for support. He was wrong on that, Mr. Speaker. He indicated also that his motion was the only motion on the order paper as it related to doing something for this industry. His motion was still in the gestation period in his mind when the honourable member for Ponoka-Rimbey entered a motion. Mr. Speaker, on all those occasions he was wrong, as he is wrong on this, because I indicated to him that we received these reports for information, and we were going to follow through with a 3-fold process. Number 1, we're going to discuss them with other agricultural ministers in Toronto in July. Number 2, we're holding public meetings throughout the province in conjunction with Unifarm. Number 3, we've got discussions right now with federal authorities taking place to hopefully develop a national policy so that we won't have one province competing against another. I would ask, if he has proof contrary to what we have, he would release that report, because there have been no reports, Mr. Speaker, done to my knowledge, and if he has that knowledge, I would hope that he would be honest enough to relay it, because to date he has not been such.
Defensive. Very defensive.
I can understand the minister being defensive, because what is wrong are these reports.
That's right. Factually wrong.
And I'm happy to do his research for him, Mr. Speaker, but he usually messes it up. And I'd like to...
Honourable member, perhaps we could get to the supplementary question. Thank you.
That's right.
I'd like to ask the minister if he's considering having the viability of an ethanol industry reassessed. Can he really put any faith in the officials and departments involved in the first study that is wrong and filled with falsehoods, and the high-priced consultants that he hired that didn't discover those inaccuracies and added some more of their own?
Mr. Speaker, I always wondered why individuals in the honourable member's constituency said he walked funny. And the reason being is his crotch is so full of slivers from trying to walk both sides of the fence.
There have been some interesting comments made by both the member for Vegreville and the Minister of Agriculture. Some very interesting ways of getting around some unparliamentary language. Perhaps the minister could complete an answer.
Speaker, I don't want anybody to think, notwithstanding the irony that's coming from the other side, that we don't take this issue very seriously. We have indicated and we have been very supportive, and we're hopeful that this report would have proved more positive. But unlike the honourable member opposite, we recognize that we have to make decisions based on fact. And we're going to... And that is why, Mr. Speaker, as the Premier indicated yesterday, and as I underscored, this is just one item of the basis of fact that we're going to make the decision on. I'm trying to leave that assurance with the honourable member. If his head is so thick that he can't get it through, I'm happy to repeat it again to him. This is just one step of a many-fold process that we are involving ourselves in to make sure that we examine all possibilities of ensuring that the net flow-through is to the farmers. And that's who we're going to make sure benefits from an industry in the event that we establish it on the basis of sound economics.
Mr. Speaker, It's obvious that having the oil industry premier represent agriculture's interests on the priorities and planning committee isn't helping, and I'm wondering if the minister isn't concerned that his obvious lack of clout in cabinet isn't resulting in this constant favoritism of the oil industry at the expense of agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, it's obvious we've got a lot more clout than the honourable member for Vegreville. It's also obvious we've got a premier who cares very dearly about the agricultural community in that he is the chairman of the Agricultural and Rural Cabinet Committee. If one looks at our budgetary estimates last year, Mr. Speaker, over the year previous, we find that we had a modest increase of some 7%, again, which underscores our commitment to the agricultural community. We had a budget brought down that had an excess of $500 million towards the agricultural community, much more than the previous, and the rural area kicked them out. The previous New Democratic Party did have in Manitoba, Mr. Speaker, because we are supportive and the farming population, recognizing that, notwithstanding the oft-repeated untruths coming from the honourable.
Let's not get into untruths, misleading the House and all that. We've had enough of it for one morning. Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Stetler.
And this supplementary is also to the minister, Mr. Speaker. I know the minister says he's taken the issue seriously, but is he, if he's taken it seriously, but is he taking it intelligently? And consequently, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the minister along that line, if he's taken it intelligently, would he go back to some of his original talks in the thoughts in this House, and because of the complicated nature of this problem, hold public hearings, not meetings with different groups, public hearings to get at the full issues and let all sides get out there, hammer out the economics in public.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the thoughts that have been conveyed by the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon, and he recognizes, unlike some other members in this Legislative Assembly, the complexity of the nature, and I appreciate his wisdom in that area. But I should point out to him that we are going to have meetings, and I indicated that in my statement when we released the reports, that we are going to, in conjunction with Unifarm, conduct meetings throughout the province of Alberta. And we're going to conduct those meetings also in the provincial riding of Chinook.
Thank you. Stetler, supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm most pleased, I think.
That's really not called for. With due respect, members, the honourable member only had a chance to get 3 words out of it. Thank you. There are indeed 9 other members who would like to get into question period. Question period is due to expire at 10:52. Perhaps we could get on with it a bit more. Stetler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My supplementary relates to the minister's comments with regard to formulating a national policy for the ethanol industry. And I wonder if he could perhaps give us some more details on the state of negotiations there, with a view, I suppose, to up front eliminating a balkanization of what could become a viable industry, as happened in the red meat industries over the last decade.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to reinforce what we indicated earlier too, whereby we are having discussions, and I've had personal discussions with the Honourable Minister, the Honourable Charles Mayor at the federal level, so that we can have proper coordination of the development of an ethanol industry. I missed the first part of the honourable member's question. In the event that I haven't adequately answered it, I'm more than happy to do so in a private way.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon on behalf of the Liberal Caucus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is to the Premier. His answer a couple of days ago, Mr. Speaker, on the Lubicon issue clearly shows that he's stalling and that the Lubicons are being jacked around a certain amount, Mr. Speaker. Yes, that's jacked around bad? Okay. Mr. Speaker, also, I believe it would appear now that the meeting with Lubicons, where he announced he would be going for a tribunal, was nothing more than a PR trick. Now, I would like to ask the minister, for instance, has he received a copy of the letter mailed from the, or has he received, not a copy, of his letter mailed from the Lubicons in the middle of April that outlined what their agreement, what they thought was his and their agreement as to obtaining a tribunal? Has he received that letter?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member would have to be much more specific on letters.
The letter, Mr. Speaker, outlined the fact that they were going to go for a tribunal and that the Premier had agreed to accept Davy Fulton as one of the tribunal. Could I then ask whether the Premier has contacted Davy Fulton to see whether he would be part of the tribunal? And it's Attorney General, it's not to you, it's to the Premier. Have you contacted Davy Fulton to see whether we'd be a tribunal?
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party is missing a lot of information on this issue because the name of Davy Fulton was raised by Chief Omeniak. He said it is somebody who he has a great deal of faith in. I pointed out to him that the federal government said that they would not accept Mr. Fulton as the arbitrator, and therefore together, Chief Omeniak and myself worked out a way that Mr. Fulton could represent the Lubicon Band, and that would be by he being their advocate to a three-person tribunal, the second person coming on behalf of the governments. That would be the provincial government and the federal government appointing or agreeing on the second person, and then the two of them agreeing on the third as chairman. And we worked that out between ourselves. I think it is a positive improvement in this discussion, and I hope that we can convince the federal government to allow a tribunal like that to proceed. It would not be the government's responsibility or role, obviously, to seek out the Lubicon Band's advocate. They have a relationship with him, and they want to deal with him.
Mr. Speaker, we don't need more photo opportunities. We need some action. What has the Premier done to get this tribunal, this is what three people are, to put those into place? What has he done with either the Indian Affairs? Because Indian Affairs said they've turned it down. So either I'm reading the wrong letters or you're reading the wrong letters. What is he going to do when they say they turned it down?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Same question asked 3 times.
Not only 3 times today, Mr. Speaker. He and I have had the same question raised just a week ago, I suppose. And again, I have to give him the same answer because you've got to give him the facts. And the facts are, Mr. Speaker, that we are working both through a negotiator representing the government with the negotiator who represents the federal government. I discuss with the chief and I discuss with the chief's advisors some of these matters. I also have our Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs discuss the matter with Mr. McKnight, and we are trying to convince the federal government that a tribunal system will work. I think my discussions with the chief, he feels that we are making progress. We are on the side of the Lubicons on this matter, and I'm going to continue to be.
Boy, Mr. Speaker, I've taken my breath away. I'm having trouble. For the Premier to come out and say he's on the side of the Lubicons, has the Premier, what does the Premier answer to the published reports by the Minister of the federal in charge of Indian Affairs that say he will not accept Davy Fulton? What does he say to that?
Mr. Speaker, you missed the earlier answer. That's exactly why we came up with the tribunal. They would not accept Davy Fulton as a single arbitrator. Now, I've said it already to the honourable member, and if he's not listening after he asks the question, that's unfortunate. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that the honourable member knows that we are working with the Lubicon Band, we are on their side on this issue. We have already made an improvement. We have been able to get a firm offering of some 25 square miles. We are also talking to them about expanding that. We are talking to them about moving the location of the acreage that they would get from where they currently have a settlement to a much more favorable location protruding out into the lake, which they would like to have. We said we will do that. The chief is very pleased with that. We said we want to ensure that this goes ahead, and we'd like to help flow in funds for constructing their community, for helping with health care, for helping with schools. All of these things are progress, Mr. Speaker. We're dealing with the Native Band, and the Alberta government is helping them, is on their side. They are Albertans, and we are wanting to work with them, and we're going to continue to do it. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party somehow seems to be missing the facts.
Calgary Mountain View supplementary.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable E. Davy Fulton, an eminent Canadian jurist and a former Conservative Justice Minister, was originally appointed by the federal government as an independent mediator to resolve the issue. Why does the Premier now insist that he can only be re-involved as an advocate for the Lubicon people? Is the Premier saying that Mr. E. Davy Fulton failed in his to act as an independent mediator when he was appointed originally?
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the honourable member is acting and asking questions without any facts. The problem with Mr. Fulton was that Mr. Fulton moved from an independent position into one of being an advocate for the Lubicon Band. Now, I have no problems with that. I mean, he is a respected jurist. He is a person of some stature in this country, and I'm pleased that he's gone to the side of the Lubicon Band and said, I am pushing their case. But having said that, there isn't a person in this room who would then say, having become an advocate of one side, you would then be the independent arbitrator. And the band recognizes that. That's why they've agreed with me to allow him to be their advocate on a tribunal. I don't know why the honourable member wouldn't understand that. It seems simple enough to the band, it seems simple enough to the government. That's why we're making progress in this regard.
Member for Clover Bar, followed by Calgary North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture. Yesterday I tried to help the government and the Minister of Career Development. Today I'm going to again try and help the government. Mr. Speaker, it seems to be a pattern that this government announces a program and then it doesn't have the mechanics to carry out that program. Now, my question to the Minister of Agriculture, is the Minister in a position to indicate what the waiting list is, how long the waiting list is for people who are applying for pipelines and pumps to transfer water from, say, lakes into dugouts, how long the waiting list is?
Mr. Speaker, maybe I can take this opportunity just to elaborate a bit as it relates to this program. As the honourable member is aware, we are going to purchase an additional 10 units in addition to the 50 units that we do have for pumping. There is presently a waiting list of 2 to 3 weeks. And I should share with the honourable member also that we are giving a priority to livestock producers, recognizing that their concern is possibly a little greater than other producers. But we are working very quickly. But I should point out, because it's so important, we announced this program acknowledging that it was going to take us a little while to have the mechanisms in place. The Honourable Minister of Environment tabled yesterday the pamphlet that outlines the specifics of the program, but we wanted to signal to the farming population some security, and that's what we have done, because the weather conditions are as such that a good rainfall will offset and do a heck of a lot more good than any government program could.
Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister, the problem was brought to the government and everybody's attention in this province by the people in the St. Paul area last year. Right. Now, Mr. Speaker, I could pick the telephone up and have 10 truckloads of pipe in this province within 48 hours. Somebody's not doing their job. My supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, can the Minister indicate how many miles of new pipe have been brought into the province since the Minister and the government announced the program?
Mr. Speaker, I'm more than happy to dig up the specific details the honourable member requested, and I deeply appreciate, as I always have done in my relationship with the honourable member over the last 12 years, as he did serve as my MLA when I was a federal member of Parliament, his advice and his counsel. And I should point to the honourable member, too, that I answered him in the first question. We have purchased an additional 10 units, which is an additional 10 miles of pipe.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister of the Environment. Can the Minister indicate what inventory was done before the program was announced as to the capacity for well drillers to be able to carry out with a proposed program? What inventory is done with the drilling capacity?
There are a series of initiatives taken with the water well drillers in the province of Alberta to basically encourage their technical abilities and skills. And we have an ongoing consultation with the Water Well Drillers Association of the province of Alberta. We know exactly how many bona fide water well drillers there are, and the honourable member will know that in the pamphlet that we outlined yesterday, it indicated there would only be licensed Alberta drilling contractors. So we have that information. I wouldn't want to give you the specific number today. I hate to be out by 10 or something like that, and the honourable member might get mad and say we're providing some erroneous information. But we do know, under the provisions of the program, we've also said that there would be eligibility for upwards of 6,000 farmers, ranchers, or acreage owners, and of course we can't drill 6,000 wells at the same time, the same week. But to this point in time, I'm unaware of any backlog of any applications from anywhere in the province of Alberta. There have been a couple of water well drillers who have contacted my office and said that we should be careful that people who might not need a well would try and access the program to get an additional well. So, of course, there will be priority for hardship cases allocated first.
Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary question is the Premier, in light of the fact that so many of these programs are announced and the mechanism is not in place, can the Minister assure the legislature and the people of this province that when he announces a program that he will make sure that his ministers have the backup to be able to initiate the program shortly after it's announced?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary.
Speaker, supplementary back to the original to the Minister of Agriculture. He figures that new pipe will be in 3 months. I'm sure the farmers, he'd like to know that the farmers are raising cattle, not camels, and they can't wait for 3 months. Well, has the Minister looked into the question of using second-hand pipe from the many drilling and oil supply companies in Alberta? There's a lot of pipe stacked there, as the honourable member from Clover Bar mentioned. I don't believe there's any need to wait for 3 weeks for new pipe.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member indicated 3 months at the opening part of his comments. He indicated 3 weeks in the closing part of his comments. He's obviously very confused, as he traditionally is in this legislature. I indicated to him, not as it related to the pipes, there is a backlog for the uptake of what we do have. As it relates to the purchase of 10 additional units, we're on track with that. And I will report the specifics back to the honourable member for Clover Bar, who raised a legitimate concern. We want to leave the farming population the assurance, so acknowledging that the situation varies from area to area within the province. There's a drastic difference in one corner of this province as compared to the other. The northeast corners have recently had snowfall. I can give him a detailed map if he would wish, so that he can have a breakdown as to where some of the areas are a little more severe as to the other areas, but we wanted all farmers to know that we were going to be forthcoming in supporting them in the event that the climatic conditions were such that they needed the help.
Calgary Northwest. Vegreville, final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Agriculture, I'm wondering if there's enough flexibility in the pumping program announced by his department to enable people to rent pumps that are smaller than the tractor-driven pumps supplied by his department, because there are cases where the people can't have access to their source of water with those large pumps.
Well, I thank the honourable member for that representation, and I will take it up with our departmental people. I should share with the honourable member, as is indicated in the brochure that was distributed yesterday, that we have reduced effectively by 50% the cost of those pumping equipment to our farming population, so that it is a very modest cost to rent the equipment that we do have available. But I will take his specific recommendation up with our departmental people, and I thank you for it.
Cypress Radcliffe, supplementary.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Agriculture. I wonder if the Minister of Agriculture can inform this Assembly how many farmers and how many small villages or hamlets have taken the opportunity to move water through the pipe system already this year.
Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, I could respond. It's 12.
Thank you. Calgary Northwest, followed by Edmonton Avonmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question is to the Minister of Career Development and Employment. Statistics Canada's figures were released today and show again that both Canada and Alberta's unemployment rate has decreased. My question to the Minister of Career Development and Employment is, has Alberta's rate declined because of a shrinking labour force?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the honourable member has brought up the issue of the labour force statistics because they, as released today, are very, very positive in terms of Alberta. I should point out that on a seasonally adjusted basis, the unemployment rate in Alberta is now 7.6%, down from 10% this time last year. And Mr. Speaker, that's an additional 40,000 people employed in the province of Alberta during that period. I should also point out to the member that one of the dangers that can happen in examining raw unemployment data is that in some cases unemployment rates will go down, and it's based on people leaving the labor force, and I think that's been the dramatic experience of the province of Manitoba over the last half decade. Possibly new government there may change things, Mr. Speaker. But I should say that in fact Alberta's labor force has expanded during that same period. Our labor force has increased by 11,000. Excuse me. So to see the unemployment rate go down while the labor force is in fact increasing are signs of a very strong economy, Mr. Speaker.
As first supplementary, last month the minister expressed some concern that Calgary's unemployment rate would increase as a result of more people looking for jobs who worked during the Olympics in February. Has that occurred?
Mr. Speaker, I did caution in my remarks last month about the labor force stats in Calgary, as a matter of fact, that with the increased number of people who have left jobs during the Olympics, that there was a potential for Calgary's unemployment rate to increase. I also said, Mr. Speaker, that a sign of the strength of the economy in southern Alberta will be the test of this month's labor stats. And I should say that the unemployment rate in Calgary is 7.5%, and that's down from 9.6%. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, there are an additional 1,000 people working compared to the month of the Olympics in February in the month of March. So that, I believe, is a very significant test of the the Calgary economy.
Second supplementary, with regards to Edmonton, we have noticed that there has been a significant difference between the rates in Edmonton and Calgary. Can the minister bring us up to date on the situation in Edmonton?
Mr. Speaker, we have, as a government, been concerned about the difference in the unemployment rate between Edmonton and Calgary over the last year. As a matter of fact, the spread between Edmonton and Calgary this time last year was 3 percentage points, and I'm pleased to report that the spread now is only 2 percentage points. It's still a difference of 2 points, Mr. Speaker. We're going to obviously address it. Some of the initiatives that have been announced recently in northern Alberta, together with the Grant MacEwan college announcement, are going to have a very positive impact on employment in the province. Edmonton's unemployment rate, Mr. Speaker, is 9.6%, but I must say, although the unemployment rate is still unacceptably high, there are an additional 4,000 people working in this economy this month compared to last month, and 8,000 this year compared to the same period last year. We will continue, Mr. Speaker, to not only bring down the unemployment rate in Edmonton, but in the province as a whole. I should say that these statistics are very pleasing to me, particularly for my responsibilities and certainly my colleagues who have we have all experienced a tough time with regard to employment over the last year.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, final supplementary. University is out, and we have a number of young people who are, of course, looking for jobs. Earlier this week, in the House, a question was asked of the minister with regard to the high rate of youth unemployment in the province of Alberta. Can the minister advise the House as to the current state of youth unemployment in this province?
Mr. Speaker, youth unemployment is of particular interest to me and my colleagues. It's obviously an area that we must continue to work hard. Traditionally, across the provinces of Canada, the unemployment rate, the difference between the unemployment rates of the general population and the unemployment rates of the youth in this province have been a disparity of about 3 percentage points higher. We were concerned last April with the youth unemployment rate, which was at 17%. Very, very high, Mr. Speaker, and for a number of reasons, and certainly one of those reasons is that people in that age category who drop out of school and do not further their education obviously are putting themselves at a disadvantage in terms of finding a job. But having said that, Mr. Speaker, the unemployment rate for youth in Alberta has dropped from 17% in 1987 to 13.4% in April of this year. Still high, Mr. Speaker, still too high, but the trend is very, very encouraging, and we look here in Alberta to set another record for youth employment in the province of Alberta this summer.
Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past number of summers, the government has always announced additional step positions in light of the increased high unemployment rate of youth. Even at 13%, as the minister acknowledges, there is still that very high unemployment rate for the youth of Alberta. I'm wondering if the minister is considering increasing the number of step positions this year as well.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have undertaken on a regular basis on behalf of my colleagues to be sure that there is enough step dollars available, summer temporary employment dollars available for youth working in the summers. I certainly undertake to monitor that on a regular basis. Obviously, this is the time of year that we pay a great deal of attention to STEP. I should say, however, though, Mr. Speaker, that last year we did not put as many dollars into STEP as the previous year. However, we did have more youth employed during that period. My belief is that the strength of the economy is actually overriding the demand for wage subsidies through the STEP program. Does not mean to say that we won't follow it, but I believe that the job creation is happening naturally, and the necessity or the demand for a subsidy for programs like STEP are not as significant or dramatic as they have been in the past. We will watch it. It's a very important point, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar if there is time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are to the Premier. By ensuring vasectomies, tubal ligation, and insertion of IUDs last month, this government admitted it erred in its judgment in removing them from the fee code. I just received a letter from a woman who had a tubal ligation on March 24th, just 2 weeks before this procedure was reinsured. She has a great sense of justice, as has many other Albertans in similar circumstances. Will the Premier not, therefore, take steps to rectify this gross error in judgment by reimbursing those who are the victims of his government's poor judgment and have had to pay out of their pocket for these procedures?
Mr. Speaker, I imagine the honourable member would want to raise those questions with the Minister of Health, and I will take them as notice and advise him. I might also say, Mr. Speaker, that when the government is struggling with a $3.5 billion deficit, I think initiatives to try and help the taxpayers of Alberta in some way are certainly ones that the honourable member would support rather than be so negative about. Nevertheless, when the government did take some initiatives, consulted with the people, and then found that there was probably a reason why we should change, I don't find that as particularly a terrible thing. I think that's a government responding to the people that it represents.
Right.
Mr. Speaker, I hold the Premier responsible for the actions of his ministers. Even though the government's experiment has failed and it has reversed its policy, does the Premier think it is all right to balance the budget by reducing access to reproductive and health care?
Mr. Speaker, I think even the honourable member will agree that there has been over the years in Canada, it's not just in Alberta, a tremendous growth in the cost of health care in every province throughout this nation, and that most people who are looking forward to the future and trying to plan in the best interests of the constituents who they represent are trying to figure a way of keeping this magnificent health care system that we have here in Alberta the best there is on into the future. And yet, if it continues to grow at a certain level, beyond the capacity of the taxpayers to support it, it would obviously do nothing except bankrupt a government or the people who we're trying to serve. So there has to be initiatives taken. Now, some initiatives will not be perfect. Some will really help. Others will have to be changed as you get more and more information. That's what is happening in this case. I think it's the kind of thing that every government in Canada should be doing.
Mr. Speaker, by reinsuring these services, the government has recognized that they are medically required. Does the Premier not therefore feel compelled to reimburse those who have paid for those services because he may have violated the Canada Health Act and because it's the only fair thing to do?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's a certain set of regulations in place for a period of time, and that's what people respond to. I would ask the honourable member to take the matter up with the Minister of Health and see if there are any problems as to dates and so on. But frankly, my previous answer still stands. The government's taking initiatives, trying to work out a way to help the people of Alberta in the high cost of this system and yet maintaining the quality of the system. That's one of the things that the Royal Commission, the Heinemann Commission on future health care for Albertans is looking into right now. There may well be some recommendations come from that commission which will help the honourable member in her future thinking about the health care system and the governments as well.
Mr. Speaker, is the Premier not willing to lead the way with the Minister and his Cabinet and the Treasury to ensure that Albertans are treated fairly and that these people who have been victims of their policy be reimbursed and for the money that they put out in an 8-month period?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member is talking about the government leading the way, I should point out to her that in Alberta, the government leads the way with the best health care system in Canada. The government leads the way with the greatest amount of funds advanced on behalf of the people of Alberta in Canada. And the government is not just taking the current situation as what is best for the people of Alberta. We are also have put in place, as I just said, a long-term planning commission to make sure that the healthcare system isn't just the best now in Canada, but it will continue to be that way well into the future. That is leadership from the government, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
Time for question period has expired. Order, please. Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to finish this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Are there any additional supplementaries? Fine. The chair earlier in the day did not leap to its feet. The chair can leap to its feet. It's trouble trying to have to speak in the third person. But earlier in the exchange between the Leader of the Opposition and the Premier, there were two statements made that really were unparliamentary and were picked up by Hansard. As made by the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker, that is totally misleading the House. That is unparliamentary. A bit later in the exchange, this comment was made, that's a lie. That is also unparliamentary. The Chair brings it to the attention of the House and would also bring to the attention of the House that from time to time there is this exchange going back and forth across the floor with somewhat similar statements, and perhaps all members over the weekend might take 3 minutes perhaps to look at